A Pluralist Order by Common Man. Chapter 1. Brexit is to Trump as Trump is to AOC. The majority of you are likely aware of the similarities between the vote in favor of Great Britain leaving the European Union and the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States. After most major media outlets and the independent polling agencies they use got both votes wrong, they had a lot of explaining to do. Hence, the massive amount of news programs and documentaries dedicated to finding out why these failures occurred. The answer given, no matter how inadequate it may be at explaining the failures of the polling and news agencies, does shed light on the reasons for the outcome. The rise of populism. The programs and documentaries are almost unanimous in their agreement on the subject. Populism is on the rise. It is the reason for Brexit and the reason the Scots want autonomy from the United Kingdom. Populism is responsible for electing Donald Trump on the promise to end NAFTA and build a border wall, but it's also responsible for the rise of Alexandria Ocassio-Cortez and her idealistic Green New Deal. To further division in the United States, populism was behind both the Tea Party and the Occupy Wall Street movements. Populism has encouraged California to secede because the federal government is not progressive enough, and Texas to secede because it fears that federal agencies have become too powerful. The American people are clearly not happy with things as they are, but are far from in agreement on what to do. These populist problems seem to be found all over the world. Canada faces secession movements in both Alberta and Quebec for differing economic and cultural reasons. Spain faces the same problems in both the Basque and Catalan regions. Italy has been fracturing and has seen the rise of the Five-Star Movement. France is dealing with the Yellow Vests. Many former Eastern Bloc countries are experiencing a surge in far-right nationalism. Many analysts believe that Europe is ready to erupt into what they call a potential European Spring. This alludes to and pays homage to the populist movements that swept over the Arab world during the prior decade that began in what has come to be known as the Arab Spring. Perhaps The Economist magazine said it best. For too many people in Western democracies, progress is still something that happens to other people. Wealth does not spread itself. An underclass appears beyond help. Finding a way to reconnect with them and provide an alternative to populism will be at the top of the agenda for political and business leaders of tomorrow. Of course, there are a few things implied in this statement. The first implication comes by saying Western democracies. This implies that such may be true throughout the rest of the third world nations, but should not be true at home. After all, we have good governance and good economies. A condescending, elitist assumption. The second implication made by The Economist is that the rise of populism is due merely to a problem of perception. The perception is that others' lives are getting better while your own life is not. Thus, a disparity in the rate of progress and not a true lack of progress, or worse, a decline in social mobility. Another elitist assumption. Finally, it is assumed that the rise of populism is a bad thing. Populism is bad for political and business elites. The status quo is being challenged. This statement is important in understanding how the elites will handle populist movements. However, if we are to make effective compromise proposals, we must examine the objective truth of any such statement. First and foremost, is the rise of populism a problem for the elite business and political class in Western nations? Without a doubt, this is the most sound assumption made by the author in this quote. For an entire lifetime, these governments have formed a coalition of powers that were the dominant bloc of the international order. How they deal with what they perceive as a crisis will largely determine what type of world order will replace the current one. The populist movements in these countries could render the elite powerless, potentially creating a power vacuum that is often followed by anarchy until the void is filled once again. Indeed, this is a challenge for Western leaders, but they are not alone. Elites around the globe face the same problems. What does Iran or Turkey do with the Kurds? China with Hong Kong, let alone Taiwan. Global elites will have to compromise with their own people before brokering compromises with their fellow elites. They will do so in order to remain the brokering power for their own people, losing some global clout in order to preserve their status on the home front. The elite themselves are as unique as you and I. Many will be opportunistic and see the tumult as a chance to increase their power and wealth. Others will be noble and seek a better future for all. Most desire only the status quo. All of these factors must be considered when seeking to establish a framework for compromise. For those of us who believe in pure democracy, there are approximately 7 billion different opinions to factor. A simple task, as I'm sure you can perceive. Now that we have established that populism is a threat to the current world order, is it also true that the rise of populism comes from only a perceived lack of progress? On the contrary, in the United States, it may be that the perception is not as bad as the reality. Americans have seen a decrease in living standards ever since President Nixon took us off the gold standard, known as the Nixon shock, which inaugurated a new era of the international order. This was referred to by many as Bretton Woods II, with those less astute merely saw it as a continuation of the original accords. However, it was the inception of the petrodollar which has been the basis of world trade ever since, at least until now. Furthermore, Americans have seen no real rise in wages since 1995. More than a generation of stagnation and decay for the average American, while the rich have become as wealthy as ever. There is a disparity, a true disparity, and not one of perception, of income and means across the country, which is fueling the rise of populism. It is not because the people fail to see how technology has made their lives easier. It is because the elites fail to see the diminished quality of food, clothing, shelter, and healthcare. General well-being that the common people have had imposed upon them. The anger and resentment towards this misappropriation of wealth will have to be dealt with on a local level first, before global systems can be restored by the will of the people. In conclusion, we can all agree that the rise of populism is likely to alter the status quo. As such, this rise and assertion of their will by the masses of people is a danger to the business and political elites of the world. It will be their task, as the economists put it, to find a way to reconnect with the people. If they do not, they not only risk losing their own power and position, but also the destruction of over a millennia of Western institutions. Since so many around the globe have yet to benefit from these institutions, it is possible that they would perceive no loss from their destruction. A horrifying thought. Therefore, these institutions must be bolstered, as they always have, through compromise. If we can do so, these critical institutions might easily last another millennia. We should all remember that we cannot restrict the power of government without loosening the reins on other institutions. We cannot marshal corporations without limiting our own liberties. Finally, we cannot fight disparities in wealth without affecting the incentives to earn an income. These conundrums can only be resolved through compromise. The elites must be the first to extend the olive branch. They better do so soon.